Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of cloud computing. Today, my guest is from Connection Cloud. We have the Chief Operating Officer of the company, Neil Blumenfield. Welcome to the show today.
Well, thank you, Rich. Glad to be here and glad to talk to your listeners about the Connection Cloud. We've been at this for about 4 years, working on the problem of connectivity to SaaS data primarily. So over the past decade, the use of SaaS applications in the enterprise has grown dramatically, and that's for the obvious reason. SaaS provides rapid deployment, low initial costs, virtual elimination of maintenance and upgrade costs, and as a result, in the enterprise, people are not only using Salesforce for Salesforce management, but they're using Zuora for billing, they're using Intact or NetSuite for ERP, they're using a host of marketing applications. And that's created a new problem that we had thought we had solved about 10 years ago with access to behind the firewall on-premise enterprise apps. But now it's started all over again, where enterprises are using dozens of SaaS applications, and they all have different unique ways to access the data. So what we find is that for current enterprise SaaS applications, about half of the access is through the APIs. And yet each of those APIs is totally unique. They have different levels of functionality, different kinds of query languages that sit behind the apps. So you get anything from a Salesforce.com with its really full-featured SOCL to other applications where the APIs are very, very simplistic and merely allow you to send an ID and retrieve an account one by one. So for a user who's trying to access that information, either in a business intelligence application or directly from a programming language, they need to become very intimate with all of those underlying APIs and program to them directly. So that creates a scenario where really each of these SaaS applications becomes a new data silo, a new database onto itself that users have to access. And what that creates is a scenario where enterprises who are trying to use a lot of SaaS applications, but trying to get an overall view of data coming from 1, 2, 3, 4 applications becomes not only difficult, but virtually impossible and much more complex than it was 10 years ago when that data was pretty much all sitting in SAP or Siebel or Oracle applications. So here's what data in the cloud looks like now. There's data coming from multiple SaaS applications. And if I want to access data from more than one of those applications, there's really 3 scenarios. One is data integration, second is data synchronization, and the third is just straightforward data access. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences. So if I'm looking to integrate data, what I'm typically going to do is take data from multiple applications and download it into a data warehouse, which I'm going to maintain behind the firewall. That obviously is very complex, and there's been a lot of data warehousing projects that have been going on for some time, and those projects are all both very expensive, very complex, and routinely don't really get the user what they want, which is real-time access to data. So what typically is done in those cases, I use some kind of integration tool. I download the data, I join it. On my side, it's a heavy IT laden enterprise. And again, what I get is not necessarily what I want, which is data that is coming from multiple data sources in a real-time kind of basis. The other option is to synchronize data, and this is the simple case where I close an opportunity, I win an opportunity in Salesforce, and I just want to create an account in SAP. And there's a lot of tools that do that and do that quite well, where they run on a message or there's some kind of connector that basically just sends that Salesforce data into SAP, or maybe it's sending Zuora data into Salesforce. But that one-to-one synchronization of data, one point from point A to point B, is also common. And again, it tends to be incomplete. So what we think a better solution is to avoid all that synchronization or integration, avoid the data warehousing if you can, and rather create a single common access to multiple data sources on a real-time basis, getting only the data I need and optimizing access through these various APIs. So what we've chosen to do with the Connection Cloud is use the most common language for data access in the world, which is SQL, and use that to provide interface to the whole host of SaaS data that's out there. So then rather than going through these complex integration or synchronization projects, what we suggest is give the users what they want, which is just access, data access to real-time data in the applications they need. So if my question is, I want to figure out how much revenue I can recognize this month, and that data is spread across Zuora and Salesforce, or Intact and Salesforce, or NetSuite and Zuora, I can send a single query with SQL. The Connection Cloud takes that SQL, translates it into what the underlying API understands, and retrieves the data and sends it back to the user. So if the backend API is capable of doing complex selection, projection, joining, we can do that at the backend and send the information into the cloud. Or if the underlying API does not have that capability, then we bring all the data back from the application that we need to answer that specific question, process it in the Connection Cloud, and return the answer real time to the user. So the Connection Cloud then presents a hosted, scalable, multi-tenant platform that gives users access to a wide variety of SaaS data, and they don't need to understand the schemas of the underlying data sources. And that's critical, because what we find is that as easy to use as SaaS applications are, the underlying schemas are as complex as the enterprise applications they've replaced. So for a user to understand that to do revenue recognition, I need to get information from subscriptions, invoices, invoice item adjustments, invoice items, accounts, and to understand specifically what I need from each of those objects, even in a single data source, is very, very difficult. And if you add a second data source in, it becomes something that very few users can deal with. So within the Connection Cloud, we create a virtual database, a representation of all of the users' metadata for all of the applications that they're accessing. And that would include custom fields in any of those applications. And from that single repository of metadata, we can then, whether it's coming from business intelligence and reporting tools, or it's coming from custom programs that are accessing data and feeding it into some other user interface, or if it's just coming from Excel, through using standard ANSI SQL, we can retrieve the data that's required to answer the specific question that the user is asking at that specific time. So the Connection Cloud currently has Liberators available for a wide host of SaaS applications, anything from Salesforce to Intact to Facebook. And we also provide a Liberator toolkit, which allows you to create custom Liberators for behind the firewall applications, for big data sources, or for some of the many, and it's about 50% of the SaaS applications out there that actually have no API. So what we try to do is provide Liberators out of the box for the typical data sources that people are trying to access. But for those more one-off kind of scenarios, we also provide the toolkit, which allows users to develop their own Liberators. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. So I love this story in that, the cloud uh, kind of introduced an old problem, brought it back, this getting data past the firewall, and that you guys used a cloud-based solution to solve that problem in a different way. Was this the obvious choice on how to make this happen, or did you have a number of alternatives when you looked at how to solve this problem?
Yeah, great question. So there were a lot of alternatives, and there's a number of other ways that people have attempted to solve this problem. And when I talk about solutions that were geared much for more for integration, synchronization, ETL kind of products, that was definitely another option. And what we did is we talked to a lot of users of SaaS applications, and a lot of providers of SaaS data. And we got the overwhelming response that all I really want to be able to do is get access to my data, uh, typically in a real-time fashion, and just get answer to a pretty straightforward question. So we really built the solution. We architected the solution around optimizing that kind of scenario. A user that every month needs to do um, a summary to determine revenue recognition or figure out what my sales opportunities look like this month, um, or users that just have ad hoc queries that they need to run, just on a one-off basis. And what we tried to do is through SQL create this data virtualization layer, which basically makes simple that very complex back end that the users have to deal with to answer those straightforward questions. So by creating an SQL query that has a virtual view of the underlying data, the user can reuse that query over and over again and get those straightforward answers to simple questions, seemingly simple questions that rely on very complex data structures underneath.
So when you say virtual view, Neil, you're not replicating the data in the connection cloud, are you?
We're not. So we do have a project underway which will allow a user to warehouse data in the connection cloud. So if you have a scenario where you're running end of the month financial reports and you're running 30 reports on basically the same set of data, we're going to allow a user to store that data and report on it. Likewise, if I commonly join across NetSuite, Salesforce, and Eloqua, I can go ahead and do that once and then report on that, and then we'll allow the user to retrieve deltas on a time whatever basis that is, daily, weekly, monthly, to update the data store. But more typically, we're not storing data; we're storing metadata only, and then retrieving data in real time. So the view is created not by storing a view of the data per se, but it's by storing the view in a query in metadata and then retrieving the data as needed.
And then kind of a wrap up question, Neil. I think I understand the technology, but when you engage with clients, do they know that they have this problem, that they need you, or do you have to convince them that this is a better way than building these pipelines and conduits or whatever they've been doing in the past?
Yeah, it's another good question. So our users do know they have this problem. Whether they're accessing a single data source and they're just unable to get the data that they want out of that data source, or they're trying to get data from multiple data sources, they know they have a problem. Uh, what they're amazed by is that there's a straightforward solution, because what they expect is to get what I need, I'm going to have to do something very, very difficult. I'm going to have to download all this data, pump it into Excel, and then do a lot of manipulation in Excel, or I'm going to have to get one of these integration products, create a data warehouse, engage IT, and put that project on the roadmap, which maybe I'll get done in 6 or 12 months when resources become available. So what they're amazed at is that there's a way to actually get to your data on a real-time basis and not have to go through 3 different APIs to find the data I need. So there is awareness of the problem, but we find that users are very surprised that there's actually a solution.
Well, terrific. Well, it sounds like it'd be a much more cost-effective way to get this done as well. Did you think about that with your pricing and how does that piece of it work?
Yeah, well, we follow the SaaS model in our pricing. So we do allow users to come in and use the Connection Cloud at no charge on a limited basis for a limited number of queries indefinitely. And for enterprise users, it's a monthly fee that ranges from about $200 to $600 a month, depending on number of queries and number of users. So it tends to be, compared to a data warehousing solution where you may be looking at major IT resources for an extended period of time, it's a dramatically less expensive solution, much like most of the SaaS world provides.
Well, that's terrific, and it sounds like they can kick the tires without a lot of work as well.
Absolutely right. So if they come to connectioncloud.com, they can sign up for a free trial. We'll help them get through putting together the initial queries if that's useful. But yeah, they can kick the tires, they can access their data, and for a lot of users, the free version is all they ever need.
Wow. Well, great, Neil. Well, hey, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
All right, Rich, thanks for the time.
You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on cloud computing.